We are now live. Hey guys, thanks for hanging out with us on this Google Hangout today about teaching English abroad. We had some technical difficulties, but we made it there in the end, and we're all on the Hangout. We have Caroline and Shannon calling in from the Chicago office, and Julie calling in from New England, region where she works in campus relations. Can we start off this Hangout by everyone just going around, give a quick introduction of what you do here at Teen, and also why you're on this panel, where you taught English abroad, and kind of just share briefly a little bit about yourself. Julie, do you want to start?
Sure. So I'm Julie Tooman. I'm one of the regional directors for Teen. I cover sort of the greater South, but live in New England because it's where I live. And I taught abroad for 2 years in China, and then for a year as part of my grad program in Taiwan.
Okay, well, I'm Caroline Tell. I am an assistant program manager here at Teen, and my programs that I work on are our Australia semester programs, specifically in Sydney. And then I also work on our internship programs, and those internships range all over the countries that we work in, including Thailand, China, Australia, New Zealand. And I taught abroad in Vietnam. So, yeah.
All right. I'm Shannon. I'm also an assistant program manager, and I work on the Asia teams as well as the short course teams. So we do the summer programs in Australia and some faculty-led programs throughout the year. I taught English in Thailand for about 8 months, and yeah, I loved it.
My first question for you guys is, what sort of took you on this path to decide to teach English abroad? Where did you sort of initially start your research or even find out this was an option? What kind of took you down the path?
I'll start because mine's the least relevant to everyone nowadays. So I taught abroad in '99 when the internet was just barely public. So in terms of tools, there weren't really any. My story went, I was graduating from college, and my advisor said, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know, law school, grad school, cardboard box. Like, I'm really open to possibilities here. And I was an Asian history major, and so she said, you should go to China. And I laughed, and I was like, who will send me to China? And she said, we will. And I said, okay. I don't recommend making decisions that way, everybody. Not the best course of action, but it worked. I made it for 2 years. So it was great in the long run, but short run, not the most researched of decisions.
A bit serendipitous.
You might say.
What about you, Caroline?
Yeah, so I had graduated from college, and then I worked in human resources for about 2 years. I knew, ever since I studied abroad in Brisbane, Australia, actually, at the University of Queensland, and ever since doing that, I knew that I wanted to work in international education, but when I graduated, the opportunities weren't coming to me. I ended up landing a job in HR, and I knew I really wanted to work my way into this field. I did, a fair amount of research. What people seem to say between, just contacts of mine that I was talking to and just research that I'd done online, random blogs about international education. I was reading that, as much international experience as you can get, the better. So that was exciting news for me to hear because I was really eager to go abroad again. So I did some research about different programs, but I also knew a friend who had done the program that I did, and he recommended it very highly. And so I ended up, just going forward with it. And I was really glad I did.
I'm sorry, I forgot the question. So just why?
How did you sort of choose your program? How did you end up going to Thailand, and sort of where did you do your initial research? I guess, how did you end up there?
Yeah. So, sorry, I was going to wrap up everyone's stories. I knew that I wanted to get involved in international education after, or rather right before I studied abroad, and then, so when I got back, I was sort of panicked that I was a business major, So I met with the provost of the international programs office at my school and showed him my resume and said, what do? I feel like I'm making a mistake, but I can't switch my major. And he said that I just needed more international experience. So I studied abroad on semester at sea, so we traveled around a lot, but we'd never spent a lot of time in one place. So he said that's what I was missing from my resume, and that I should challenge myself and go somewhere that's very different. So I knew that I wanted to go to Asia, but I wasn't sure where. And then I was speaking with my mom, who grew up in Hong Kong and Japan, and asked her kind of what her thoughts were. And she said Thailand. So I started researching programs in Thailand. I found one program based on a recommendation from my sister's friend. And then my friend from Study Abroad found the same program kind of separately, so we ended up applying to it. And I kind of stopped doing research after I found out that my friend was also going on it, because I think we both thought that the other person had researched it a bit more thoroughly. So looking back, I probably would have done more research on the program that I went with. It all worked out well in the end, but there were some bumps in the road.
Okay. I guess a common thread sort of in all your stories, and I think a lot of people who choose to have sort of that international experience and teach abroad, is that they didn't necessarily, major in education. They don't have the prior teaching experience. This might be their first time sort of stepping into that classroom. And I'm wondering, is that the case for all of you? Did any of you sort of have that prior kind of teaching experience? And, was that nerve-wracking? Was it, kind of scary to step into the classroom without that sort of background? Who wants to start this one? Julie?
Sure. So I didn't really have a background in education. I tried to be an education major a few times in college, and for very many reasons did not go that route. So I didn't have the background in it. It wasn't really nerve-wracking for me in terms of the teaching. I'm a bit of a ham, and I actually love being in front of people. So for me, it was sort of like, wait, what? People are going to stare at me for hours every day, and I get to teach them stuff? Cool. It wasn't until I got into the classroom and my students were my age, and I realized there was very little separating teacher and student, aside from born in an English-speaking country, not born in an English-speaking country, and all of a sudden that made me a teacher. So that was a little intimidating, and it was much more intimidating when I realized the importance of standardized testing in China, and that these students' success actually hinged on my ability to give them my barely passable English language skills so that they could pass standardized tests written by native Chinese speakers. That part, a little intimidating for sure.
Definitely.
I say I was not super nervous about it. I didn't have any sort of formal background in education, but I had worked, as a camp counselor for many years and has been a tutor in the past, and so have had some, had dabbled a little bit in at least leading a group somewhat. So I wasn't, and I'm a pretty extroverted person, so I wasn't super nervous about being up in front of the class or anything like that, but I was a little nervous about the lesson planning aspect of teaching, and honestly, there was very little guidance in the program that I did, but I just used, every resource online that I could find to help me create new games and, give me new material and worksheets, and I found that there was a lot out there, for someone who was pretty inexperienced, especially because I was teaching, really varying degrees of the levels of English language skills. There were the more honors courses where they were, quite advanced, and for me in those courses, it was coming up with vocabulary words that were going to be at their level. And it was trying to make it still exciting for them, even though it was much more advanced. Whereas with the beginner level, it was a lot of games, and that was pretty straightforward and easy because it was so basic. But it was with the more advanced lesson planning where I became a little bit more intimidated. But the resources are certainly out there based on my experience.
Yeah, and I went with the program that I did. The first 4 weeks of the program were your TEFL certification. So I had to pay for the certification, and then they guaranteed me a placement after. So that made
Shannon, can you take a step back and just explain like what is the TEFL and just give a little bit of a
Yeah.
101 on that?
So it is a teaching English as a foreign language, or the teaching English as a second language. So you can get a kind of a formal certificate that just says that you are, you know, I guess you've taken a class. I think it's really all that it says. So you're kind of approved to take English as a second language. I did have to pass a test. Like there's a test at the end of the program, and it was not challenging by any means. But it was a really good course. I had a great instructor, and so he gave a lot of tips, because I think that things that I wouldn't have thought of, and kind of cultural tips as well. So already kind of pointing out that the TH sound doesn't exist in Thai. So when you're teaching, you know, those kind of TH words, you have to be aware that that sound is going to be harder to do. And he also kind of gave the heads up on some symbols, or kind of like when you mouth things to try to get people to recreate sounds. Some of the things that you would use to mouth are kind of vulgar in Thai, so just as a heads up, like that's not appropriate to do when you're teaching 10-year-olds. You know, that's inappropriate. So it was a good class in the way that I got some tips into games that I could use in the classroom if I was going to teach little kids, because at this point I didn't know what my placement was going to be. And then also just kind of gives you general cultural tips. And I'm sure that's not what's included in every TEFL certificate. I know that you can get them in Chicago as well, kind of before you go. And the place that I ended up teaching at was a language school, so they didn't require a TEFL certification. They just required a college degree, and then they trained you on their material. So in theory, I probably didn't need the TEFL, but it was all part of kind of the package where I was guaranteed the placement. And my greatest fear in life is spelling in front of people. So teaching and writing on the board is something that I am like paralyzed with fear on. And even as a part of kind of my test, we went into a rural school in southern Thailand to teach, and my instructor was like, all right, so you spelled 3 words wrong on the board. I was like, no. So it was something that I had to really watch, and definitely something that I didn't want to like teach people the incorrect spelling of. So I kind of reworked my lesson plans to make sure that I was comfortable with that. But it was, yeah, and then at the school I ended up teaching, on the weekends we only taught kids, and then during the week it was a lot of adult learners and some business professionals that kind of would come in as a group. So it was really uncomfortable at first teaching business professionals who were older than I was, and much like Julie said, you know, I was kind of like, I am not qualified to teach, you know, the head of this really impressive company in Bangkok English, when I was struggling to define like a present participle and, you know, all the kind of basic English words that I should know. So yeah, so I kind of struggled with that, but everyone in my classes was so kind. It was more of like a teamwork as to how we could get them to progress in their English levels. And while it was the most intimidating to go into classes where I felt like I was not qualified to be there, it was really awesome to see the students improve. And then those kind of turned out to be one of my favorite classes in the end.
Yeah. And what you were kind of just getting into, Shannon, a little bit was my next question is, you know, what kind of students did you have in these sort of classes that you're teaching, and what did that sort of weekly schedule look like? How many different classes were you teaching? How many hours were you spending in the classroom? What does it kind of look like from week to week?
Yeah, well, I guess I can just like jump in. So so I taught at a formal language school, so I was on duty from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. 5 days a week. So my days off were Monday and Tuesday. So the other staff at the school had different days off than we did. So like traveling was kind of difficult. But I was on call, I guess, from 7 a.m. to 4. And then the classes or the courses that I taught were in kind of bunches of 40 minutes. And then there was a 5-minute break. So sometimes people would come in and do 4 classes. So I would have them for 4 sessions of 40 minutes with a 5-minute break in between each one, which was definitely needed when it was the weekends where we had students. So I taught 3-year-olds up to kind of 15-year-olds, and then usually kind of business professionals during the week.
Yes. Yeah, so I worked at a high school. That's where my placement was. So I specifically only worked with students who are about like 13 to 17. And our schedule was more traditional. It was Monday through Friday. But it did vary each day how many classes I was teaching. So it was typically it was about between 4 and 6 classes every day. So no matter what, we were there for the entire school day, which was like 8 to 3. But whether I was teaching 4 classes one day or 6 to 7 was really the maximum. So you were there for the entirety of the day, but it just depended on how many classes you worked, how many classes you actually taught, and that was helpful to have those free periods to continually lesson plan throughout the day.
And then I was at a university, so my schedule followed more closely what university professors would do here, with a bit more intensity. So I taught 8 to 10 sections, anywhere from freshmen to seniors, and then I had a couple of graduate level courses as well. I was at a really, really large university, and they didn't have enough native English speakers. So some of my classes, like my speech class, was 50 minutes long, and I had 100 students. So if each student talked for 30 seconds, each class was over. I decided that was too big, so I split that myself into 4 sections, and I kept like adding. I gave myself a lot more work than I needed to because I like took the levity of the situation pretty seriously, and then I realized that I really liked teaching, and so I took on a bunch of side classes, and then I tutored some Korean students. China, when I was there, it's kind of sky's the limit. Like if you want to work a ton, the need was so high. Like I was in a city of 7 million, and there were about 300 native English speakers when I was there. So lots of opportunity for some side teaching. And then Taiwan, I taught 4-year-olds, not my forte, through, kind of like business English courses. So it really ran the gamut. And, kind of same thing of what Shannon and Caroline were saying in terms of like level of support varied, ability of students varied, it's sort of like that, the broad lesson of like, if you're flexible, you will succeed. I would say that was sort of like the #1 thing from all of my teaching experience was just like, if you can roll with it, man, teaching English is great.
And you guys kind of hinted on this when you were talking about sort of that schedule and sort of what flexibility you had in that in terms of the hours. But like, did you get opportunities and sort of breaks where you did get to travel? Or Caroline, for example, I know you were sort of had that teaching experience. Then you actually went off. You were in Australia after that, I think, traveling. So, did you was it more about having a local experience where you were teaching, staying there, or were you kind of using that as an opportunity to go different places, explore the region, and just kind of talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I can start with that. I think, we've actually got a pretty diverse spread here. So my program was technically like a volunteer teaching program, and it was only for 2 months. So, through the program, it could have been, I believe 1 month was the shortest you could do, but, you can do up to it as long as you want, but you really have the option to tailor your program to your own needs. So I did 2 months, and every weekend, well, I shouldn't say every weekend, but almost every weekend, I traveled with the other people who were volunteering through my organization. We would travel, to local places, local cities, or rural towns nearby, or we went up to Sapa in the north of Vietnam. We did a lot of different trips, and we definitely had plenty of time to travel. Fortunately, I think the teacher and administrators at the school had experience working with volunteers from our organization, and they said to us up front, listen, we know, you're here to volunteer and you're here to teach, but you're also here to see our country and to learn as much as you can while you're here. So they were very understanding that if we needed to take a Friday or a Monday off for doing a more extended trip that was farther away, they were perfectly fine with that, and they actually encouraged it. So I wouldn't say that would be the case everywhere, but we definitely had plenty of opportunity to travel. And then after my 2 months in Vietnam, I then traveled to Thailand and Cambodia, and then went back to Australia to visit all my friends from when I studied abroad. So it ended up being about like a 5-month trip, but it was nice to sort of do it all at once, because you only get so many opportunities to quit your job and go abroad.
Yeah, and so since I was in a formal language school, I did not have vacation days. They were not so forgiving about not showing up to work or taking time off. It was very challenging, and especially since I had just started as like a first-time teacher, I was on not like a probationary period, but you have, to like kind of prove yourself for the first couple months. So they pay you like half. I was paid, but they would pay you like half of what the other teachers would get because you're a new person, and then you kind of had to test to the next level. So I honestly don't know if I had any vacation days. One great thing about Thailand is that there are a lot of government holidays, which is really nice. So, so for the King's birthday, we were able to travel. For Christmas, it was my first time working on Christmas, since that is not a holiday. So my friends and I got together that morning before work, and then we all went to work on Christmas. So that was kind of an interesting day, but we didn't have a ton of time. Bangkok was where I was at, so I feel like I'm glad that I stayed there, because it took me a long time to feel comfortable there. I thought that I would adjust really quickly, because I've never been in a situation where I don't know, it was so different. I wasn't expecting to be so uncomfortable, and I was very uncomfortable, and then it's kind of lonesome when you don't have friends and you can't go outside and just start talking to people, because I didn't speak Thai, so it was very challenging. And then I started taking Thai language at my language center, which was nice, working at a language school. So that kind of helped. But because I didn't feel super confident going on long trips outside of Bangkok by myself, I more waited for the holidays to do bigger trips with friends, and then I used my days off to really explore Bangkok. I had a walking tour of the city book, and I went through every single walking tour that was in the book, because I felt really comfortable in Bangkok. So I was like, I'm going to see everything I can. So that's what I did, and then I used the bigger holiday breaks to travel around with my friends. And then at the end, I had saved up money to do kind of a bigger trip at the end. And in Thailand, you hear a lot about Bhutan because the kings are good friends. So that's where I had kind of my eyes set. But when I went to go look at the airfare, it was super expensive, because everyone in Thailand wants to go to Bhutan. So then we ended up doing a bigger trip around Nepal for the last kind of couple weeks of the program before we went back.
Cool. And I was there for 2 years, so I had a good amount of opportunity for travel. I taught on the weekends as well as Monday through Friday, so I didn't actually do a lot of like weekend trips. Did more sort of like staycation. Guess it's not really a vacation if you're not taking time off, but like exploring the city. I mean, it's a big city, 7 million people, so you've got some geography to cover there. Cool thing about China is like there's old stuff everywhere. That sounds really trite, but it's just true. So, you could always find interesting things to do. And then, much like Shannon, I really saved up. So part of why I worked so hard was so that I could travel. As you get about 6 weeks off for Lunar New Year over the winter. So my first year, we did a huge trip kind of in southern China. And then my second year, I really splurged because I was going to leave winter because I lived about 5 inches away from Siberia. So I did 6 weeks in New Zealand, which was much, much warmer than where I was. And yeah, that was my main, I mean, I could go into like all the cities, but we don't want to be here till tomorrow. So, but yes, lots of opportunities to travel, for sure.
No, that's awesome. And we're going to wrap it up in a few minutes here. I want to ask sort of for a last piece of advice from all of you for any ambassadors or students who are watching this call. But yeah, I think it's great that you all were able to kind of share your different experiences and all very different. And I think that's, an important thing to kind of recognize that, it's not just sort of like this one path to, teaching English abroad. There's a lot of different ways you can kind of approach it. And I hope that kind of came through sort of in the call today. And, you three are a great example of that. But yeah, any last sort of parting words, from your wisdom, from your experience, what would you tell to someone who's, considering teaching abroad after graduation?
I can start. So I would say what I've learned just in trying to, trying to teach English abroad and trying to work in the field of international education is that people who work in international education love talking about their jobs. They love what they do, or they wouldn't be in the field. And it's a really exciting field to be a part of. So the best thing that you can take advantage of is trying to talk to people who have done it or talk to people who are in the field, because they will very happily do so. And I think that's why I felt like I had such a successful experience, is because I got, everything that I did was recommended to me from someone who had done it. So I knew it was tried and true. And I just felt like I really got a lot out of those connections that I made in talking to people from the field. And then I would also just say that don't be scared. I know it's really a daunting process, especially going somewhere like Asia where people don't speak the language, but all in all, in my experiences, people were incredibly friendly, especially because they know that you're there to help impart your own knowledge. They were just incredibly welcoming and really happy to have us.
Yeah, I think that kind of the same, even if you are kind of not an extrovert and more introverted and more nervous about teaching in front of a classroom, there are many different ways to teach. The most that were allowed in my class were 8. So I only had 8 students. A lot of them were groups of 3s. So it was a very kind of intimate classroom space, and it wasn't intimidating. So don't be overwhelmed about maybe getting, my friends were in classrooms with 50 10-year-old students. There are many different options and many different places to go. My language school was Berlitz, and they're located all over the world. So they have kind of a training method that can take you through it. So there are a lot of different possibilities. So don't be kind of nervous about it, but also really do be smart. I thought I did research, and when I got there, I was like, I didn't do enough. So just kind of, as Julie mentioned before, really going with the flow, but also kind of trying to be a bit more maybe proactive to make sure that, you're going with a reputable company, you know how to find an apartment when you get there, kind of a lot of steps that I just kind of assumed would be a lot, I guess, easier than when I got there. And then trying to figure it out. So while there is some sort of fun with the spontaneity of it all, in reality, maybe planning is a really good idea.
Yeah, I think kind of echoing what Shannon and Caroline have already said, it's one of those experiences you're not going to forget. I mean, any international experience is what you make of it. I think that teaching abroad really affords you a very different type of experience. And the amazing thing about it is there's such transferable skills. So I really honed my public speaking skills when I realized that I had to speak at a native clip but articulate clearly enough so that anyone could understand me. And so now I take that into all of my classroom presentations, and I present to rooms of hundreds or thousands of people, and it's not a big deal because I've had so much experience basically public speaking, sitting up on a platform in China. And it's not a skill that I got through my BA in history. I'm much more able to speak the English language. My understanding of grammar is actually really pretty impressive, and I can actually do both British and American pronunciation because I was supposed to teach British phonetics. So all these things that you don't really think about are really beneficial, and it's also just throwing yourself out of what you're comfortable with. I don't think that Shannon, Caroline, or I planned on doing the things that we did or having the experiences that we did. And we talk about oh, it was spontaneous, it was great. Well, you know what? Some of my spontaneity really sucked and I hated it when I was there. But hindsight, nothing is ever going to be as challenging as this one time when I was in China. And so just kind of forcing yourself to get out of your comfort zone, knowing that it's going to be uncomfortable and that's okay. That's part of the experience. And that there's an opportunity for everybody. None of us have education degrees, and yet it worked out just fine. All of my students passed. So, I would say just to quote Nike, because they're so aptly put, just do it.
You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for taking time to do this call, and we are signing out.
Bye. Bye. Good luck.
Bye, guys.